Tonight about the message of this hour. That is what the Lord would have the world to give ear to in the midst of all the voices and what is trying to be spoken, and seems like everyone has something to say. You listen to the television, and it seems like people are clamoring to tell the world their story, whatever their story is, or whatever they found out, or all the world ought to give to this cause or that cause, or give ear to this problem. And everyone has their own campaign and their own story to tell. But in the midst of all this, the Lord has something to say. The Lord's got a story to be told in this world. And it's one thing that's fascinated me and has been almost a mystery and to me, as after I've come in contact with the truth and learned about it, that how I could live all those years among a Christian people and among a Christian atmosphere and never have heard of these things. It's a mystery to me. How that somehow this wonderful message wasn't at least spoken against. I just never heard it. Never heard anybody say anything for it or against it, because the people I was with evidently had never come in contact, never heard the words spoken or what God would have these people to give ear to in the time in which we live. And here it seemed like any little incidents in the earth would that happen in the world will make headlines. It'll be on the international news. And yet what God has to say, the creator of the universe, what God has to say, nobody knows anything about it. That didn't make news, does it? God's going to restore a church. God, the God of heaven. Wouldn't you like to hear that over the news? We have a bulletin here, special bulletin. Just found out that God in heaven, the living God, made a proclamation to the world that He's going to restore a church once again in the earth. It ought to be on the news, hadn't it? It really should. Oh my. The President of the United States and his, I can't call him a friend, this fella he's talking to, we've called over here to talk to. Paradox, isn't it? But I hear that's all you hear about on the news. President of the United States, Occupy, a few, 4 years probably, in office, maybe 8, and hear all the world's attentions focused on this man and what he's doing. So little attention's given to God, to Jesus. Came to his own received him not. And here he came to the world he created. Come down and made it all. And created it all. And here nobody even knew him. Nobody knew who he was. Thought he was an imposter, a liar, some kind of a criminal. He died as a criminal. They crucified him like a common criminal. Savior of the world, the creator of the earth. Think of it. The creator of the earth and all of mankind. He came down to visit them. They killed him like a common criminal. There's a message to be preached. There's a message to be sent to this world. In our time, in our day, there's a message. Listen, if we could just know, we hear this message, we're so saturated with this gospel and this message, we forget. We forget how little of this world knows about what we're talking about tonight. Why, it's such a small number. In this United States, even in the religious world, it's such a minute, small number that have even had these thoughts cross their mind, that God is going to have a restored church in this earth again in this time, that God's going to do something in this world. Everybody wonders what's going to happen. Everybody's talking about Jesus coming, wondering what's happened in the earth. I heard a man on television the other night trying to unravel Revelations. That man needs some help. He's trying. You could just tell he's just doing his best to give what he thought was right, and trying to help people and trying to come to some kind of understanding of those words that he was wrestling with. My, that's surely God's going to have to help the ministers in this time. And I've thought Paul, it talks about Paul turning the world upside down, doesn't it? And here Paul, there wasn't a printed page, there wasn't radio, there wasn't television, there wasn't any of that. And yet somehow God, in His wisdom, that was no problem. The lack of television and mass media was no problem to God in Paul's day. That didn't hinder God in getting this message out to the world. Listen, it went out. It went out to the world. And there's one thing that thrills me. As I look at this world, and the mess it's in, and the low state that humanity is in, the evil in the world. Every time you leave your home and walk out that door, you think, well, there's somebody going to break in, don't you? It's on our minds. And that's the world we're living in. There's something that just I can't help but think about, and it thrills me. And I think these days are almost over. You know, this 6,000-year days of man, Brother Mears, are almost over. The evil, think of it, the evil that has been flooding this world for centuries upon centuries, thousands of years. I get thrilled when I can't help it. It thrills me to think that those days are almost over. Almost over. God's going to have something else in this world besides that. They've had their day. They've had their day. And to think we can be a part of what God is doing, to bring all that to a close, to wrap that up, and have a part in closing the door on evil of this world, of the centuries. Think of it. God's going to slam the door on evil. And there's going to be something done about evil in this world. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Listen, it's wonderful. God do something after all these centuries. I heard the cries of humanity. He said it's enough. It's enough. God's had enough of it. He's going to do something about it. And to think that in the generations to come, they're not going to have to fight what we fought. There's going to be a measure of peace on this world. In the centuries to come, there's going to be some peace in the world. That's wonderful. But it's going to be done by what we're doing here tonight. Politics isn't going to do it. Leaders of the states getting together like they are, they ain't going to do it. But what we're involved in is going to get the job done. And changing the hearts of humanity and mankind. I just, those thoughts flooded my mind tonight as we was in here, and I just thought how we ought to be stirred and praying. And the scripture was on my mind today. It says, lift up your eyes. Well, the harvest is ripe. And Jesus said it. Lift up your eyes. The harvest is ripe, white unto harvest. And if you know anything about grain, wheat particularly, you watch that wheat. It's very important Now, some crops is not so important, but wheat particularly is very critical when you gather that grain. You've got just a few days, and here that'll set out in there. You plant it in the fall, it grows all winter long, and begins to grow as soon as it thaws in the spring. Grows until first part of July. That farmer, he watches that grain, that wheat. And comes almost time, he'll go out there every morning. We'll go out there every day, begin to check that. You can see that begin to turn white. And it turns color in just 2 or 3 days. The whole field just begins to turn. And when that wheat gets just right, you've got to be in there. If you don't, you'll just lose half the crop. It'll begin to fall off in the ground. Not only that, just in the heads. If dew comes on it, my father study that crop, walk out there with him, walk out into the harvest, into the wheat, and I'd do what he'd do. He'd take that kernel and begin to shell some of that out in his hand, and then he'd bite it. Test that. He could tell just when that wheat was just ready to cut. And my point was, when that was ready, when the harvest was white ready, you couldn't waste any time. It had to be harvested. And we was in there. We'd get in there just as early as we could in the morning. In the morning it would be damp, and we'd watch that and go out there and stand around for an hour or two. And the minute we could begin to cut, we'd cut. And we'd go not until we got tired. We would go until it'd get too damp. Then we'd quit. It didn't matter if it was midnight. We'd go from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight that night. Didn't matter. And if the weather looked bad or any hint of any bad weather, if we could, we'd cut 24 hours a day. We'd never stop until that crop was in. Because I've seen my father stand and in 15 minutes lose an entire year's work. I've seen him. I've walked the floor with him, heard him pray. I've heard my father walk the floor and heard him pray as the hail fell and lose a year's work in 15 minutes, just like that. So it was critical. And a cloud come up, listen, you got a little nervous. And if Jesus used that as an example, then he was making a comparison to that. And I believe there's something to that. And in this end time, when that harvest is ripe, when it's ready, listen, I don't know how it's going to happen. All I'm saying is, if Paul didn't have any trouble with the help of God in his day, with the additional aids we have today, I don't think we're going to have any problem either. That's my point. Listen, God has a way. When he said it's time to cut the wheat, listen, the wheat's going to be cut. This harvest is not going. We're not going to lose this harvest. God's not going to lose this harvest. There's a harvest coming, and listen, this net is not going to break this time. The net's not going to break. God's going to harvest this crop, and he's going to gather this grain in. It's going to be done. Whether I know about it or do anything about it, doesn't matter. It's going to be done. This harvest is going to be brought in. I'd just like to have a part of it, wouldn't you? I'd like to have my eyes open. I'd like to be in on that. I'd like to say, Lord, what can I do? When we was on the farm, listen, it didn't matter how old you were. In harvest time, you had a job. That's the truth. I was just a small boy. In harvest time, listen, I had all I could do. Dad had begun to lay it out for me before he went to work in the morning. And I had my job to do. And just as a small boy, there wasn't an idle hand anywhere on that farm on harvest day. You had all the work you could do. And that's just the way it's going to be in this end time. There'll be no idle hands standing around in harvest day. That is, if you're part of the family that's gathering the harvest. So may the Lord help us. May he keep this in our minds. and not lose sight of what God has done for us and how He's talked to us and the secrets that He's let us in on and how God has cared for us and shown us such mercy in this end time to allow us to have the insight and the encouragement in our day. Listen, this message is an encouragement. It's a great encouragement. If you don't believe it, you go out there and talk to some of them that don't have this. They're discouraged. And knowledge is a great help. And wife and I saw a sign the other day, and it says, and I preface that by saying we might think at times that getting all of this may be a hard job. It might be laborsome. It might be trouble. To understand all this, get all this. The sign said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. If you think it's pretty expensive to get an education, try ignorance. I thought that as far as the church, think this is trouble. You'll try this without it. You'll try living without it. It's a lot more trouble. So it's wonderful. It's a great encouragement to our hearts to have what we have God give us this knowledge. And our hearts are greatly encouraged by it.
Appreciate what the Lord has brought me to and how He's dealt in my life and what He means to me, and I just want to thank Him from the bottom of my heart for ever leading me this way, and how He has blessed our family and kept His hand on us. And I just think of the different times that I come to church. When I come and then go away, I think back on the services and I think, Lord, it was just thrilling. It's something that I've never felt before, only in these services, and I think how I couldn't feel it anywhere else but here, and I'm so thankful that He brought me here, and just want to do better this year. I realize it seems like the balances aren't balanced as far as my expressing what I feel to the Lord. I know the Lord has outweighed me a lot, and I feel this year I want to go see if I can balance the scales up more, because I do appreciate what He's done for me, and I ask your prayers.